Alright, party people. Let me see if I can record this. I'm driving to San Diego. I'm about 30 minutes into a 2.5 hour-ish Friday drive. So I got about 2 hours left of driving. I wanted to have caffeine before I drove. I'm going to try to record this relationship series episode here, but wanted to have caffeine before I drove, but decided that because most of the caffeine I consume is in liquid form, I decided to maybe avoid having a lot of it because I don't want to keep having to pull over. It's annoying when you're trying to drive somewhere and you have to keep pulling over. I don't like having to do that, especially when there's already traffic. I know there's going to be traffic. I'm trying to get the heck out of LA and Orange County, at least. Like, I know I'm going to hit traffic in Carlsbad. Who doesn't hit traffic in Carlsbad? But I don't have to be anywhere till like 5 today, so that's pretty nice. But yeah, I was a little, so I've almost finished watching this series. I don't know if it's the whole series that's going to end, but there's 3 seasons of the show. I was talking about a bit before, called Shtisel. So if you plan on watching this series, maybe this episode isn't the best episode for you. Now, that's just a disclaimer, because I'm going to be, this is like a massive spoiler alert. But I want to pull from that show to kind of talk about some dynamics. Now, I'm not going to spoil the end. I can't spoil the complete end because I'm on episode 8 of 12 of the last season, or the 3rd season. I don't know if it's the last yet, but the 3rd season. But it's going to go off of Netflix today. Like, today is the last day that Netflix is going to host that show to be streamed. And so if I can't finish it today, I might not know what the actual end is or if it actually ends. But as of now, I'm on episode 8 of the last season. But I think there's like 12 episodes every season. And I was so happy. Like, I really got into the show not that long ago, like maybe last week or something. And I wasn't going to speed through it, but then when I saw they were going to take it off Netflix, I was like, shoot, well, that's the easiest way to watch it because I have Netflix, so let me not, go out of my way otherwise. But I did find it very interesting. Now, I got to put a disclaimer out there. I'm not trying to hate on religious people. I'm not, like, people know. I mean, I wasn't raised an ultra-Orthodox, or I wasn't raised as an ultra-Orthodox Jewish person, but I'm very fond of the culture. I studied a lot of the cultural religious materials. I value a lot of it. I really do gravitate towards a lot of the writings and stuff. Like, I really just love it. I like it. It's interesting. I like it for entertainment reasons. I like it for just like food for thought reasons, sometimes for spiritual reasons, for other reasons. I just grew up with a love for it, even though, I wasn't raised Jewish. I was raised, I would say, just generally with just I like a little bit of culturally relevant ideas, like, tending to the Jewish Sabbath, and, that Jesus was Jewish, and therefore, it's important to learn about Jewish culture and, about the 10 Commandments and stuff like that. Like, now I know that doesn't make a person Jewish. I'm not claiming to be Jewish because I'm not Jewish. But I respect the culture a lot. But one thing I would like to say about this show is that it kind of brought to light for me that, I was telling this to a friend, that I was kind of realizing this, that, as part of the human condition, all of us are kind of plagued with the same issues, and when it comes to relationships, I think none of us is really immune to these types of things. And so that's one thing that this series brought out to light for me, is that, I feel like you could almost take this storyline, stick it in almost any culture. Latinos, some types of Asians, some types of Africans. You could just throw it into any culture, and especially when you have like multi-generational like family units who live nearby and still interact with one another, and there's all these different, the parents and the grandparents and the great-grandparents and all the like great-grandkids and all the people that the kids and great-grandkids and grandkids and everybody marries, and all the offspring and all this, and being like in a close enough environment to actually be able to see one another, visit one another, stay in touch with one another. I think that's something that a lot of cultures, because of technology and because of like capitalism and a lot of like Western mindsets and other types of things, has definitely kind of, there aren't, I wouldn't say every single culture has that in it. There are definitely cultures where like people are pretty spread from their families nowadays, but it is still the norm, I would say, in a lot of cultures to still be like living relatively nearby and having close-knit family units. And even if you're not close by, you're still in touch and you talk to one another and stuff. You're not like completely just like, okay, they moved, like I'm never going to talk to them again. Like a lot of times with family, like people might fall out of touch and then they get back into touch and stuff like that. So even if you're not living near one another, sometimes you'll see those themes come up in family lives. But that was kind of one theme that I was kind of noticing. I was like, there's a lot of overlap in this story between a lot of what I hear from a lot of people. And so it was kind of interesting because at first I saw the series, and two things kind of like maybe initially made me not really start watching it. But because I started studying some other Hebrew related things recently, I just kind of like suddenly came across some, I was kind of wanting to watch something that, was like Israeli based. And, I stumbled upon that show, and I remembered I had started watching it. It was a little interesting, but I really kind of expected it to be more like a religious propaganda type of thing. And so I had, stopped watching it, mainly because, I stopped watching it because of the subtitles, and I stopped watching it because of the, religious themes. Because, sometimes I just have to be in the mood to want to watch that kind of stuff. And I wasn't really in the mood to kind of want to watch religiously themed stuff for a while. And I also haven't been watching a lot of foreign films for a while. Nothing against it. Just sometimes I just get in the mood to focus on different stuff. And so, I didn't really want to watch anything that had subtitles for a while, just because I was like, it's just extra effort to read it. Even though I love foreign films, I love subtitled shows and movies, for that specifically, I just wasn't into it, at the beginning. Not that there was anything wrong with the story, I just was like, well, there's no dubbed version, and and I just wasn't trying to watch religious content, because I thought it would be maybe, to some extent, maybe like triggering, or I had like some other stuff I was maybe dealing with where I was like, I just don't want to have these themes where there's all this like judgment, and like I've explained before that I know a lot of religious people, like a lot of people that I would consider not they're not ultra-religious Jewish people, but they're quite religious culturally on their end, and I'm very familiar with the religion that they're a part of because I was raised in that religious culture. And so I feel like it, like sometimes when it comes to stuff that's like really religious, I'm just kind of like, I need a break from it. And so that was my initial approach to this show. Now I think I had rewatched Unorthodox. I think I was watching, what was I watching? I was watching some Peter Santinello videos where he was talking to Shlomi again, a Hasidic Jewish person, and then I was like, let me rewatch Unorthodox because I kind of like that. And then I realized that the main character, female from Unorthodox, was in Shtisel. And I was like, oh, this is her again, And so I was like, okay, I liked her character in the other show. Let me see kind of what her role is in this, So it was kind of hard for me to kind of initially get her, get her initial character that I had watched from Unorthodox kind of out of my mind when I was watching Shtisel, because I was like, I had this other character in my mind where in Unorthodox she had some other roles that she was playing. But I was like, well, let me just see, I think it was her and then some of that Peter Santinello content where I was like, I'm kind of interested in watching something that has like some Hasidic Jewish people in it. And so I turned that on, and I really, I was like watching it, and I was like, all right, the first episode kind of caught my attention. I think I had watched it before, but I didn't really remember it, and I was like, how come this isn't very memorable? Because I thought I had watched like deeper into the first maybe couple episodes, but as I was watching the first episode, I was like, I don't really know if I'm really like, if I'd really watched this before, and so, it had some kind of mystery to it a little bit, and it kind of caught my attention. I was like, oh, I wonder what is going to happen, because it's like, there's some weird stuff happening in the first episode where you're like, well, I can't just leave it like that. Like, I want to know, like, what's with all these weird kind of themes in this first episode. It's like, it's clearly something happened that I need to know. Like, what happened? What's the backstory to this? Like, why are they introducing this? Like, what is going on? Like, I got curious and wanted to know. So the relationship side of things is kind of more so what I want to talk about. Now, I didn't write notes on any of this, and so I'm just flying by the seat of my pants, and I'm probably going to really screw this up. But I kind of wanted to pick apart some of the characters and kind of some of the relationship drama that they either created, that they maintained, or that they were involved in, or that they escaped from. I mean, like, there was just a lot. There was a lot happening, guys. But yeah, if you want to go watch this series for yourself, don't listen to this episode, because I'm gonna like just screw the whole thing up. So basically, okay, the main, I don't even know if I can remember all their names. I'll try my best. So Shulem is the main father of the show. I think his son Akiva, who's in his like mid-20s or so, is the main character. But a lot of these characters have very well developed character stories. Like, that's what makes it so good. Like, there's so much depth to it, and I really like that. Like, usually I'm like, I watch shows and I'm like disappointed because I'm like, I really like a character and they don't develop it, or like I don't like a character And like I wish that they would go more into their story, like the background and stuff. Like this one, very psychologically, they just developed a lot around it. But the thing that I find so interesting is because they're all like ultra religious in this culture that really observes, you know, Jewish law and, you know, following a lot of the traditions of all these different types of ways of living. And especially when it comes to relationships, when it comes to studying of the culture of the texts, of the religious texts, when it comes to child rearing, childbearing, you know, marriage, engagement, death, remarriage, you know, that kind of stuff. Everybody has their role, and everybody has like a place in their life, like in the religion where they're supposed to be doing something, and they're devoting themselves like to God, practicing this religion. And I'm like I said, I'm not trying to like crap on religious people. I mean, humans are humans, right? Like I don't think that just because someone's religious or secular that anybody's better or worse than any other person on the face of this planet. Like, okay, yeah, they're like the Stalins and the Trumps and all the people that like definitely they spread hatred and kill people and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about the average Joe Blow, you know, who isn't a politician of any kind or some kind of dictator who's trying to like kill different populations of people. I'm not talking about those kind of like nutheads. I'm talking about just people who just have a normal day-to-day, that they just want to be with their families, be with their friends, raise their families, you know, live their lives, go through the regular rat race of things, and hope that it all works out well. And that they have more happiness than not. You know, I think that's what most people want, right? They'd rather be happy more of the time than not happy, and have pleasure more of the time than pain. But so yeah, I don't want to have to keep reiterating that, but I mean, I just hope I'm not coming across as being like, look, these people were claiming to be religious and look at all this stuff that they were screwing up. Like, I'm not saying that, you know, it's like, I'm just saying, like, it's a good story to talk about humans and relationships. And so Shulem is this main father figure character who has two sons. Akiva being in his mid-20s, unmarried. So most of the time you see Shulem and Akiva living in the house together. And Devora is Shulem's belated wife. She comes, kind of like her ghost kind of pops up, like in memories pop up of her in the show every so often, but she's not like an actual living character in this show. And so she is a religious, devout, belated wife that people loved her. Like, so, you know, the show begins with, you know, Akiva and Shulem being pretty depressed, still grieving the loss of Shulem. It was his wife, and Akiva, it was his mother. Now, Shulem has a brother who does not live in that household. Shulem's brother, what's his name? I think it's like Zvi Aryeh or something like that. I don't know. He has a wife, and I don't know how many kids they have. I want to say they have like 3 or 4 kids, sons and daughters. I know, like a combination of young children. Not so young that they're like teeny tiny babies. They're not, but they're like walking, talking, attending like young children's schools and stuff like that. So he's older. That's the older brother of Akiva. He lives in his own house with his own wife and his own kids. He studies at the kollel at times. don't really know what his job actually is. And that's another factor that culturally I think I don't fully understand what culturally the jobs are. Like, I know a lot of times in like ultra religious Jewish culture, it is like a very esteemed kind of lifestyle to be able to study more, to be able to spend your life in study of the Torah, of the Talmud, of all kinds of different religious texts and things, like to be able to study a lot. Like, some people just, that's what they do. They wake up, they study, and then they come home, they're with their families, and they go back and they study. All they do every day is they're studying. Mostly these are men who are studying, and the wives are raising the kids. And so that dynamic shows up a lot with people studying. So this older brother, I don't know if that's kind of his role, his job in the family is to study. I can't remember off the top of my head if he had another job role. Akiva, so Shulem, the dad, owns this school, right? A cheder, it's a school, like a religious school for kids, male kids, and they study. And at some point, Akiva is a teacher at this school, and he goes back and forth between teaching, not teaching, but then he also is a very talented artist. He sketches, he paints, and you see him on occasion casually doing it, and throughout the series he becomes like a professional with painting and kind of gets outside of the lifestyle of, you know, he doesn't study necessarily like the other guys do, but he still interacts with a lot of those kind of guys. And when he stops teaching, it kind of becomes more of a problem because now he's not really around, you know, that culture. He's more like, not so much in the art world, but not connected so much to any version of like teaching or study. And so there's a lot of conflict between Shulem, the dad, and Akiva, his son, and they live in the same house, and they're just on and on and on and on, just like not getting along. And Akiva is at the age where, you know, he needs to start thinking about getting married because he's like not getting any younger, you know. And so he starts going on dates, I guess. So basically they have like a shadchan, like a matchmaker type of person who intervenes and has like a list of males and females that they kind of know, the families, and it's kind of like vetted kind of, you know, backgrounds. Now, I don't know how much in depth they go. It seems like sometimes there's a little bit of fibbing going on. Like I heard some people saying in the show, like something about like ages, like, oh, they're this age, like, oh, say they're that age, you know, instead, or whatever. It's like, oh, she's 23, oh, she's 21, you know, it's like, you know, it's like, wait, like, you know. So there's a lot of lying going on, basically, a lot of lying, that kind of makes it so that the series just is very dramatic. And I don't know how accurate this is to the culture. I would say definitely in most cultures, there are going to be quite a few people in families that do kind of bend the truth quite often. But this is like, you kind of get like a bird's eye view and you kind of know everybody's lies. And so you're not like tricked by all the lies. You just see all these other people tricking all these other characters, you know. And so it's kind of an interesting story, just how the lies get so out of control. Like it is really out of control. The lying is just like, the lying is what makes most of the drama, honestly, because there's nothing else that these people are doing other than just like the day-to-day, like eat, sleep, study, work, raise your kids and whatnot. Like, nobody's really doing anything like too wild. They're basically just living their lives that you would think were just simple lives because they're just doing all this religious stuff. But in order for people to kind of either get people off their case or to get what they need and get what they want, to get their needs met, it almost seems like they're almost forced to lie, like, so, and a lot of the examples have to do with relationships. So, like, romantic type, I don't know what you call it, like, potential marriage focused relationships. And so you have these, different age ranges of people going on these matchmaker. I think it's called the shidduch. Like, they're going on these shidduch kind of meetups planned and approved by family that's in touch with these matchmakers. But sometimes the families approve, sometimes they don't approve. Sometimes the families lie about, like, I don't know, I can't think of any specific ones, but sometimes they would lie about, like, this person or that person or whatever, just to kind of put things more towards, like, what they preferred, So, Shulem, relationship-wise, he basically has these patterns with women, because I'm reminding you, he's a widower at this point, and so he no longer has his wife, but on occasion he's meeting either through the matchmaker, meeting women, or on his own because he's high up at this school. He has a secretary that he tries to get with at some point, and she is kind of trying to push the relationship forward, and he's kind of like trying to push it off, just like, oh, like, why do we even have to make it seem like, like, we don't need to talk in public, like, and I mean, this is like culturally, they're kind of following cultural rules. Like, culturally, like, men and women aren't really, like, mixing in public environments. If you're not family members and you're not, engaged and you're not married and you're not working together, you're kind of not talking to one another, right? Like, for him and the secretary to just be out having coffee one day for lunch on a work break would not be considered, like, an appropriate thing to be doing on a regular basis. But I think once somebody gets engaged, or once somebody becomes serious in their interest in another person, then it's a little more appropriate to at least be getting to know one another. But usually it's in public spaces, parks. There's a lot of, like, hotel lobbies, just people meeting. And it seems like when someone likes somebody, they don't have to meet that many times. Like, they meet a couple times and they're good to go. Like, they're like, all right, I meet a couple times. And it seems like there's that conflict on and on about, like, the hesitation of, like, well, if you like them and they're attractive and they come from a good family and you have a good connection, like, why wouldn't you marry them? And then there's all these other people that are like, well, I might like this other person too, so I might want to see what they're like, or, maybe, and then, like, it seems like it's not socially acceptable at all according to this show. And I'm not sure, I don't want to say that this show is, like, 100% culturally accurate. I would not want to ever say that, like, I'm getting all my information from a show on Netflix, that this is my cultural knowledge. I mean, I've studied the culture for a while, but again, I'm not from the culture, so of course there's plenty that I can miss. And I'm by no means any kind of, like, professional or authority. But when it comes to the dating, I don't even know if it's called dating, but, like, when it comes to that process that's similar to dating, it seems like, you know, people can get engaged pretty quickly, and you're not really supposed to be breaking off those engagements. And it seems like people in this Shtisel family, Shtisel is the last name, like, that's the name of the show, but it's the last name of this family. So Akiva, his last name is Shtisel. Shulem, his last name is Shtisel. The brother, his last name is Shtisel. They all have, well, at some point, they all have women in their lives. And all those women's names are Shtisel, and all the kids that they have between them, their last names are Shtisel. So there's a lot of Shtisels. This is basically about the Shtisel family. And oh my goodness, I don't even know if Shtisel means anything. Like, I'd probably want to look that up. But I'm pretty attached to the story. I'm very attracted to it. Like, it's a very, there is some darkness to it. Like, some of it's not, like, happy, but it's like it's interesting because, like, a lot of it's kind of funny too. Even when there is drama, some of the drama I do find a little bit humorous. And whoever wrote this, and then the translation of it too, it translates over really well. Like, the jokes translate over really well, kind of like the arguments, and kind of like you kind of get a feel for what they're actually saying, versus, like, sometimes when you watch shows and they translate something and you're like, I don't even understand, like, why is that, like, weird? Like, why is that funny? Like, why is that, you know, like, I don't understand, like, am I supposed to laugh? Is this supposed to be sad? Like, I kind of get the feel that it's like a dry humor. Like, it's a type of, I haven't really come across a lot of stuff like this. It's almost like a dry humor. I don't really have, like, actual terminology to explain it, but it's kind of funny and sad at the same time. That's the best I can describe it. It's funny, sad, dramatic, and just, like, a lot going on. So many layers. Beyond multi-layered. And so, okay, so, so yeah, Shulem kind of has this habit of kind of seeming like he uses people. He uses women to get nice meals and to, you know, get a lot of food and, you know, have some company and conversation, but he really isn't trying to settle down. And when one of the male matchmakers in this show kind of passes away, he has this whole, like, manual or book, or maybe multiple volumes of books, of all these different single people, and Shulem, that father, happens to be in there because he had talked to this matchmaker who's, like, his friend. Shulem is in there, and I think it just said, like, with each person it said, like, a couple words, and so I can't remember exactly what it said for him, but it was something like eats and smokes, or, like, something like that. Eats and smokes, or, you know, something like that. Like, and so after that guy died, after that matchmaker guy passed away, Shulem, once he sees this book and reads some of it and sees what's in it, he's like, is this what people think of me? And he's finally, like, realizing, oh shoot, like, I do that. Like, I've had all these women, you know, he's basically been, like, widow chasing, if you will, and, like, he finds the newly widowed women and kind of, like, gravitates towards them, and then develops relationships and keeps coming over to their house when they cook, or when they cook, and like that secretary lady, when she would bring food to work and she'd like share it with him, and or like offer him food, or he kind of just hint like, oh, that really smells good, like, what did you make? Like, oh, like, what did you make? Like, oh, like, no, I don't want any. And like, oh, maybe just a little, you know, like, and like trying to play it off. But then it was like, nah, he really is like taking people's food and like all that kind of thing, and kind of like leading them on, just using them for their home cooking and stuff like that, and their companionship. But he has no intention to marry these women. And culturally, that's kind of like not okay, that he's just like hanging around with women, and eating food at their houses and stuff like that, and having these deep conversations and deep connections, but he's not intending to marry them. And so in that culture, in the show, they're not really doing the right thing. He's not really doing things like as in a culturally appropriate way. So Shulem Shtisel, this father, I don't know how old he is. I want to say he's like in his 60s or 70s, but he also has a daughter who's older and lives outside of the house and is married and has, I don't know how many kids. I think at one point they have 5 kids. And I don't know if it's like 5 kids or 6 or 7 kids, but I think they have like 5 kids, and then they had a newborn later on. So basically her, the daughter of Shulem, she's grown, she's out of the house, she's been married a while, she's had kids for a while. Her husband is supposed to be, I don't know what he does for work, but he does some sort of travel where he travels out of Israel to other countries or whatever. He kind of hates his job. He's kind of bummed because he has to be away from home a lot. And one of the times early on where you see him leaving, you know, they kind of get in a little upset where she's like, oh, he's leaving again. And it's like hard for her because she's clearly depressed and overwhelmed. And she has this daughter who's like 16 or 15 or somewhere along those lines at this point, when the dad goes to, I think, Argentina or somewhere to go out of the country. And, you know, he's usually gone for like weeks or maybe even months. And it's a strain because she's left home with all these kids. So she starts relying more and more on the oldest daughter. And then, you know, the husband doesn't really call her back. Once he leaves town, he kind of just vanishes. To some extent, just like vanishes. So she ends up having to get work while trying to raise these kids. And then the daughter has to get work too. And they're trying to make this family work. And they're young. I mean, that wife, she was young too. She's like, because I mean, they're getting married relatively young. Like, some of them around 18 years old or early 20s, they're getting married. And so it's like, they're getting married pretty young. And so even like most of the characters in this show are pretty young. Other than like the generation that's like the father's generation, or like even older than that, that's like the father's mother, who's like the family's grandmother. So basically the father, that family, so Shulem's daughter with her husband, the husband that left, he basically leaves, and it turns out that he left to try to become non-religious. So he had cut off like his side curls and shaved his beard, and eventually he calls, I think it was like 6 weeks later or something, and then he had to stay away for another 2 months so he could grow out his hair again so he could come back. And then, you know, the older daughter of that family, the one that I was saying is about 15 years old, she got really mad at him because like she has like four young brothers that she's taking care of all the time, and a baby that she's, one of them is like a relatively young baby, like not even a toddler, like still like using a bottle and can't walk yet and things like that. And so she's stuck home with all these kids while her mom is like out working, trying to make money, because he's not even sending money home, because it turns out potentially he went and found some kind of secular or non-Jewish woman and was going to try that life, and then realized he didn't really want that life. So then he kind of comes crawling back, and it takes a while for them to accept him back into the family. But eventually this daughter, who's like 15, 16 years old, her name is Rahumi, she eventually gets kind of understanding and forgiving of her father, and eventually the wife becomes more understanding and forgiving, and eventually that husband and wife open up a little restaurant with like home cooked like Jewish food, and that wife ends up having another kid. So I think they ended up having like 6 kids total or something. But they started doing better once they had the restaurant for their family. I feel like they were doing better at that point financially, and everything was working out good. And so, but there was a lot of lying in there too. Like he was like trying to like make extra money like through the stock market, I believe, and I don't really know how they got the money for the restaurant, but I think that's how they did it. Maybe, I can't remember. But yeah, they were kind of like just like trying to, just like everybody trying to kind of make things work there. So yeah, they were kind of, sorry, I'm kind of like blanking, but they were kind of having basically it's a really complicated story with them. But yeah, they eventually kind of get things back on track. So Rahumi, oh my gosh, she eventually, the daughter that I was saying was 15 or 16, was helping out her mother a lot when her father kind of fled. So she's pretty responsible, and she was mostly going to and from school once her father comes back. And she would stop at this kind of like abandoned little synagogue. It had like a window facing like the road where she would walk, and she kind of overheard this guy, his name is Hanina, they're like maybe the same age or so, and he would always be in there studying and praying and just trying to do well. And she was really like taken, like, I don't know, she got like attracted to him for some reason or another. He was praying about like having nocturnal emissions and praying about, all kinds of stuff. Like, you only hear what he's praying about because she's listening to him kind of through the window, and they develop this kind of bond by her kind of, I guess, trying to approach him at first, which isn't appropriate. So she first eventually stops listening through the windows and comes into that little synagogue. There's kind of this like machitza, this like curtain dividing. Usually it's like in those types of synagogues, like men and women don't sit together. So there's like a women's section of the synagogue, and she kind of came to him like back behind that curtain and is like, hey, I can help you, and he kind of like gets startled and kind of like, I kind of took it as like his startle being like, you're not supposed to be in here, I'm not supposed to be talking to you because we're not together, and you're a woman and I'm a man, kind of thing. That was kind of the impression I got of why he kind of left when she came in. And then he was trying to like eat coffee, like she witnessed him like eating coffee, and just like by the spoon. He was eating like spoonfuls of coffee and stuff. And then at one point I think he was trying to like burn part of his hand to just kind of like stay awake, and she was just like, you know, you gotta stop. So she's sending in these little notes with little foods and being like, you know, I can, you know, like, you can eat, you know, like eat, you know, why don't you eat this food, you know, like, I don't know how she said it, but she was kind of like, eat this, you know, and she made him little like healthy sandwiches and stuff like that for him to eat, and he would just like eat food, and he would usually just like, it seemed like he just fell asleep there, but all he did was study all the time. And I guess maybe he was living out of that small synagogue. I don't really know. I don't know how he was paying for himself or getting money or where he was supposed to live or what. And so he was like one of the more very studious religious characters that he was studying like all the time, like day and night, studying. But eventually Rahumi and Hanina end up getting engaged. I think they did something where they went to some restaurant and were like, you guys need to be the witnesses. Some older yeshiva guys, some of the older guys from the study area would, some students that were older age, not old, but like older than them, because they're like 16 or something years old, they witnessed that he puts a ring on her finger, and I don't remember the exact term, but basically they wanted to get married. And I don't know if what they did was officially promising themselves to each other, if they were officially married, if it was unofficial. I don't really know what that actually was that they did, but they were either engaged. No, I think they did get married. I think they got married against their parents, against her parents' wishes. Her parents are, again, those ones where the father fled, you know, to try to be with a secular, non-religious person, and realized that he didn't want that life, and then came back to the religious lifestyle. And so they get married, and the Rahumi's parents kind of start getting overly involved. They're like, get a divorce, you know, and she's like, no, I don't want to get a divorce. But then she does have some unhappiness early on, because Hanina is so invested in studying all these religious texts and things, that he's pretty neglectful of her. So they get an apartment together. The father helps them get an apartment together, and they end up not being able to, like, basically they have a rough patch at the beginning, because of Hanina, you know, just missing dinner. I think he came back at like 2 or 3 in the morning one day, and like, you know, but they worked on it. Like, they kind of communicated well enough that eventually they kind of like worked on things. And it turned out, I guess, that, you know, somewhere along the line during their marriage, they find out that, you know, once Rahumi gets pregnant, they find out that she's at risk. If she gives birth, either the baby or Rahumi might not survive. And so she does give birth to one child that doesn't survive, unfortunately. She gets an IUD put in, and, you know, so she can't get pregnant, so her life isn't at risk in this relationship. And then eventually she goes back to this doctor maybe 5 years later. So in season 3, she's about, let's say she's about 21 by that age or so. And she goes back so that's like 5 years later, she goes to the doctor by herself and asks, I want to get the IUD removed. And the doctor's kind of like, I don't know, remember last time it was just not a good idea. And then Hanina finds out that she wants to do this, to get the IUD removed. And so he's like, I need to talk to a rabbi to figure out, what options do we have? Can we get a surrogate? And so they find out that because, it would be both of Hanina and Rahumi's DNA, and a surrogate would be allowed because the mother wouldn't be able to have birth and live otherwise, possibly. Or she would miscarry, or she'd have to have an early abortion of the baby. I think the first child, they forced her to try to give birth at 21 weeks because otherwise it would have been more risk to her. And I don't really know what condition she had or what. But yeah, so Rahumi and Hanina are still this young couple, but by this point they've been married for so long, at least 5 years, and they find out that they can have a surrogate. They get a surrogate involved. At the very early stages, Rahumi backs out, and she's like, I don't want this. I don't know why she didn't want that, but she didn't. And I know I've seen other Jewish cultural movies with some ultra-Orthodox people where I think it was Ushpizin, in that movie, I remember, it was a big, embarrassment and a lot of shame and a lot of, sadness because that wife wasn't getting pregnant. And then I remember even in Unorthodox, in that small series, they weren't really having sex much, and so a lot of the family members were encouraging the male to divorce the woman because it had been a year and they hadn't had a baby, and then the husband's kind of mad and he's frustrated because they're not really having sex, because she's always oh, it hurts, and so they don't do it. And he tries to get his mom involved, and they get all these other people involved to give her devices and stuff that she could try to use to increase comfort or something. I don't know. But it turned out that the one time they did have sex, she gets pregnant. I don't know. It was kind of a little, that I didn't really like. It was kind of I don't know. I don't even know if you would consider that rape or molestation. I feel like it wasn't. She was kind of pressured into this, even though, yeah, it was her husband, but you could tell she was just just do it, just fuck it, just do it, and get it over with, do it. And then, they were so grateful that she was pregnant, but it's I don't know if that was an anxiety thing or a physical thing. I don't really know if there was a name of a condition that she had. They weren't talking about it on there in detail. So yeah, that was that. But yeah, so there are I've even heard that the first commandment in the Bible is when God makes Adam and Eve, and and he's be fruitful and multiply, and a lot of people say that's the first commandment that God gives to the couple, is to be fruitful and multiply, meaning have kids. And so a lot of people take that seriously, that have kids, basically you're supposed to have kids. And some other cultural views that I've heard of is that they're trying to rebuild the 6 million lost in the Holocaust, and so it's very common in some areas for some of the Jewish families to be having multiple amounts of kids, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 kids, a lot of kids. That's not uncommon. Like, and so, like, I'm not judging it. I'm just saying, like, that's kind of the scope that some of this stuff might be coming from, where I don't know for sure because she doesn't say, but like maybe she feels like using a surrogate, and then they were going to give her these like pillows that she could like use that looked like her stomach was slowly like expanding over time, and nobody would know because of course like in that culture it's not like people are walking around without their clothes on and stuff like in front of each other. Like they're not like at the beach in bikinis and things, so it's like nobody would really know because everybody's usually fully clothed. And so I'm not sure like what I always kind of wonder, okay, well, what would happen at like the mikvah if she goes to a mikvah, if she's religious and going to this ritual bath where there's like an attendant that's usually there. I think they would know, but maybe not. Like maybe you wear a bathing suit. I don't really know how it works. To my knowledge, I always thought that they were not clothed when they went into those, but I don't know. Like I've never been to one, so I can't tell you. But yeah, I don't know why she kind of risked herself. I don't really know why she risked her well-being and health and life to not use the surrogate. So basically Rahumi eventually lies to Hanina saying, oh, the surrogate is pregnant, you know, the surrogate is pregnant. And then she starts using that pillow a lot. And her and Hanina are, I think, kind of sleeping with each other some of the time because he still thinks she has this IUD in her. And Rahumi gets it removed without telling her husband, Hanina. And so eventually she gets impregnated, and he didn't know that she got the IUD removed and that she had called and canceled the surrogacy, and that the surrogate was not in fact pregnant with their baby and about to, you know, potentially eventually give birth to their kid. That wasn't the route they were using anymore. Like I think she waited quite a while into that process to tell him the truth, and I don't know why she did it that way. I have no idea. I really have no freaking clue why. But yeah, I may never know why, but I don't know why, you know, at the moment. Like I said, I haven't finished it, so I haven't even gotten to the part that explains why. Like, at this point, she hasn't even given birth to the second kid yet or anything, so I don't really know why at all. Okay, Rahumi has a brother, because remember I said, you know, that family, Shulem's daughter, who married that guy who fled and came back, they had like 5 kids at that point. So Rahumi was the daughter, and then she had like 4 younger brothers, one of them which was a baby, but then later on her mom gets pregnant and has a 6th child who's also a son. But Rakumi's oldest brother starts coming of age. You know, he's becoming a man now, and they start, okay, you need to start going on these shidduch dates. You need to start talking to a matchmaker. And his primary focus was to get into a place of study, and he just wanted to study. That was his goal. He wasn't trying to look for women or anything. He just wanted to study. And so his parents kind of spring this on him, like, hey, he's of an age where he needs to start thinking of marriage. And he wasn't bringing this up. They were kind of pressuring it. And so he kind of is like hesitant, but he's like, all right, whatever. Maybe I'll go along with it. So he starts going along with it. And he's going to meet... So this brother, his name is Yosele. Yosele, he's going to meet this woman named Shira. So... you know, I guess they don't do very good at exchanging too much detail at all, because he ends up going to this hotel lobby or some kind of meetup place. I think it was a hotel lobby. And they're going to meet. He's going to meet the Shira lady. And he walks in. There's a young woman standing like by the inside of the door. And this young woman standing by the inside of the door, you know, he comes up like, is your name Shira? And I think she said yes. And she asked, is your name Yossi? And he's like, my name is Yosele, but you can, you know, people call me Yosele, but you can call me Yossi. They never really bring up that name Yossi again, but at least not since I've been watching it. But it basically, it turns out that she is a Jew from Morocco, and the Shira he was supposed to meet, Shira Levinson, is a different Jew that they wanted him to meet. And so the Levinson family believes that Yosele stood up their daughter. There's some anger, and the matchmaker gets involved again. Like, how could he do this? And then they realize, oh, you met the wrong one. You know, because he starts explaining her. They're like, what did she look like? Because he clearly met with somebody that he liked, that he was talking about. And he liked that Shira that he met. But once they find out that she's Moroccan and all this other kind of stuff, the mother, which is Shulem's daughter, the mother, she freaks. And she's just like, no, there is no way that you're going to marry, you know, a Moroccan and all this other kind of, not Moroccan, Algerian. They're like, no, there's no way you're gonna marry somebody from Algeria, and I won't have it, and you know, but he's into this lady, and he eventually meets the Shira he's supposed to meet, and you know, like I mentioned before, they're not supposed to be talking to each other, and so I think the Shira that he liked, they ended up meeting somewhere along the road somewhere, and had hoped they would run into one another. And I guess I think the Shira he liked, that her own family or somebody lied, saying that like Yosele had said he didn't like her or something, and so the family's moving on with another option. And he never said that. And she, you know, they don't exchange numbers. There's like none of this. Like, a lot of them don't even have smartphones or TVs or internet or social media or anything like that. So it's like, you know, you're really not connected to people that, like, if you wanted to even be tempted to get connected to somebody that you're not supposed to talk to, it's like, if you can't find them in a phone book, you know, you're probably not going to find them at all. And so, you know, they're supposed to go through the route of using that matchmaker to kind of help them, you know, as like the middle person to kind of help them be like talking between families. Like, it's not usually up to the two kids to be like talking to each other like that. So, yeah, Yosele is into the first Shira, the Algerian Shira that he meets. Once they meet on the street randomly one day, he gives her his yeshiva main payphone number that's like in the hallway. And so she calls, it seems like for weeks or months, she calls, starts calling, you know, and just hanging up. Can I talk to Yosele? Yosele gets on the phone. She hangs up. And anybody answers this phone. Any old person who hears the phone ring, who's passing by, hears the phone ring, and is Yosele, is Yosele there? Hangs up the phone. Once Yosele answers. And so for months they don't talk. Eventually, Yosele starts meeting with Shira Levinson right when her father passes away, because he had been ill the whole time. Right when her father passes away, he gets engaged to her. Well, he got engaged, I guess, before, and then I think the father passes away either right before or right after the wedding. I can't recall. No, right before or right after the engagement. I can't recall which one. But I think they're in the middle of the yeshiva students. All the yeshiva guys are like partying for him and like for Yosele and his engagement. And they're like having this celebration and singing and dancing. And that's when the Shira he likes calls. And she's like, hi, Yosele, and he's like, we can't really talk because I just got engaged. And so she's like, congratulations and all that. And then I don't know what happens along the line, but I guess he realizes how much he's really not in to this other Shira, the second Shira, because he already wasn't really fully into her, but he was kind of just going to give into it because the mother's real pushy. His mom is like, Shulem's daughter, the mom of Yosele, is very, very, very pushy and angry when he disobeys at all. She says things like, I don't even recognize you, like, how are you talking to me like this? You will not do that. You will not be with that girl, like all this kind of stuff. Like, she's really putting her foot down. And the dad, Yosele's dad, the dad who had fled and left to marry some or to be with some non-religious woman in another country, but then came back, that dad is very like compassionate and sensitive and understanding. So he tries to get an understanding of what his son wants, but then the wife always comes storming in and like screwing up the conversations. And so yeah, Yosele basically is starting to talk to the Shira that he likes again, because he breaks off the engagement. The matchmaker gets pissed and is like, I'm not dealing with any of your freaking no more Shtisel family. No more Shtisel family. Like, I'm not dealing with any of y'all anymore. Like, I'm not gonna no more wives, and no more, of your kids, and no more of your grandkids, like no more of this family. Like, because like they keep breaking off all these engagements and stuff. And so she's like just over it because it, it's like a bad reputation. And so she's like, I'm just done with you guys because, and so that's how Yosele's parents find out that he broke off the engagement with the Shira lady. The name is Shira, if I'm not explaining that correctly. With the Shira Levinson lady that they approved of, that the father had just passed away. And he is like in the lab, talking about bugs and all these kind of things that he likes to talk about with this other Shira from Algeria's family. Now, at the point that I'm at, they haven't really met her family yet, and I don't know what that family thinks of her. Thinks of him. Like, I don't know. I don't think I've heard anything about her parents approving or disapproving. But the mom of Yosele is like, if you get with this woman, if you get with this Shira that you're so into, like he was saying things like, I'm attracted to her, we have a good connection, and they're just like confused, like, where did you even hear to talk like this, like saying you're in love, or you, all this kind of stuff. Like, it's just kind of like, culturally, that's not really the way that they talk about things. And so when he starts saying stuff like that, they're like, what on earth are you saying? Like, what are you talking about? And so yeah, Yosele's story is really complex because he's a pretty serious student, but it's like they really expect him to only be like with the woman that they choose. And he's met her, he kind of likes her, but he's like, he doesn't feel like they have a deep connection, as deep of or good of a connection, and the family does not seem to care about that. And I don't know why they prefer the other one when they haven't met. I don't know if they've met the Shira that he likes. I don't even think they want to meet her or even try to meet her. They're not open-minded to it. I think it's just maybe because they're culturally not the same, that they're just not into it. They're just like, no, she's not one of us. Like, why would you consider an Algerian? And I think they find out she's Algerian because the dad does some research or something. Like, they try to figure out who it was that he actually met, and then they find out, and then they're like, yeah, she seems like she comes from a good family, but, you know, she's, like, from this other culture. But I think she's religiously Jewish, just she's not from Israel. And so, I don't really know I don't really understand that part, but it's like, you know, I think that's what it is. I think it's the cultural mismatch that they're so concerned on, but I can't say for sure. So yeah. This car is weird, man. It's like leading vehicles driving away. What the hell does that mean? Like, I'm driving behind a truck on a freeway in traffic. Like, I don't know what that has to do with anything. Anyways, I still got about like 50 more minutes to be driving. And I hope we're recording here. Looks like we are. I hate it when my phone just automatically connects to Bluetooth on stuff when I did not say to do that. So yeah. Yoselei's got his mess with the Shira situation. Shulem has his mess because he kind of blew through all the women that he had options of. I think, so Shulem, that main father, the oldest one living at this point. So Shulem, I think the last lady he liked, he blew her off. Like, he stood her up, basically. He stood her up. How did he stand her up? Like, basically, they were supposed to meet at 4:15 p.m. And I think he stood her up accidentally. Like, I think he went somewhere, but then came back and just, like, took a nap. And his brother, who had been really depressed over this, over his daughter Libby passing away, that I'll get into that story. But, the brother, I think his name was Nukem or Nahum or something like that. Nahum or something. So he's staying at the house because he's got a lot of depression and grief, and at one point tried to jump off the balcony at the least ideal time when a social worker had gotten involved in the house. I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to go into that part of the story, but basically, who was I talking about? Oh yeah, so Shulem's last potential relationship was this lady that he stood up. He liked her. She ran a radio show of classical music, and Shulem's brother Nahum is really into classical music, and so I think when he stood her up, you know, Nahum invites that lady into the house, and like, maybe he'll wake up, like, come over, you know, just come in. And meanwhile, Shulem is just in the bed, in the room, sleeping, doesn't really wake up. No one even tries to wake him up. They just leave him in there sleeping. And they clearly had plans. Like, they just made the plans, like, either the day before or the day of. And, you know, so Nahum and this lady start getting into talking. He gives her a beverage or something, and they get into talking. Find out that they both have a love for classical music. I think they left maybe and went somewhere to talk or something. I can't remember. And then by the next time, like maybe a couple days later, the brother talks about this lady and that they're such a good match and that they like each other. And I think they got engaged. And so he missed out on that opportunity with her by oversleeping their... he kind of overslept their cheesecake meetup kind of time that they were going to have together. And I guess she had been sick of him kind of like overlooking her. You know, because like basically up until the point where she was like, okay, we're gonna do my the memorial service for my belated husband, and he was kind of having all these other problems with Akiva, his son, and Akiva's young child, and all these other issues, and so he was just like I can't make it, but then he ends up making it. But yeah, I think that's how he ended up planning to have like cheesecake with her, and then he ends up falling asleep and she meets his brother and they get engaged. So he's kind of alone. So let me see. I don't know how many characters' relationships are left, man. Like, I think Akiva. So Akiva, the son, the main son that lives with Shulem, the dad, the older dad that's like in the 60s or 70s. He's kind of the main character. And so Akiva, when he starts dating in his mid-20s, he meets like probably 4 or 5 women in the whole series, maybe 6 or so. I don't know. He meets a lot of women. And I think the first one they wanted him to meet was like 19 or 18 or something. But he liked the one that he met. I don't know how, I can't remember exactly how he met this first lady. And his parents found someone else for him to meet that was younger. And they preferred this younger lady for whatever reason. And it seems like they don't really try to maybe really get to know the families or anybody. They kind of like maybe really take the word of this shadchan, of this matchmaking person, to kind of really be intervening more than the parents do or whatever. Maybe they trust their judgment more. I really don't know. I'm trying to understand that more, because I feel like a lot of this miscommunication could have been resolved by the families talking to one another, the parents talking to one another, but I feel like there's a lot of miscommunication just because, like, people meeting this person and then somebody telling the kid that the other one didn't like them, and it's like, well, they did like each other, and like, what the heck is going on? You know, so that the parents are trying to get their way for their kids to marry who they want, but it's not like they have like a deep relationship and connection with the people that they're saying that they want their kids to meet. It's not like, oh, it's my best friend's daughter, or like it's my boss's kid, or like I want you to meet this person because I know, you know, like I'm a teacher and they were in my class and I know they had a good reputation with the other students. Like, they have nothing to go by, really. It seems like they have almost nothing to go by other than what the shadchan kind of tells them. Like, and I haven't heard the shadchans giving too much information. Like, they don't go too much into those meetings of like how the conversation goes. They make it seem like it's a real short, quick thing, but there actually was one segment where Akiva was going into this matchmaker, and in the middle of the meeting, he takes a call for something. I don't remember what, but he takes a call to like leave and go do something else. I think he got like an offer for like something involving like his paintings, or a job offer for like some art related thing. I can't recall, but yeah, he basically goes through a lot of women. The 19-year-old one, you know, I guess he felt a little pressured when she starts like crying and saying that, you know, like making him feel bad. And then I think later on, after, I don't remember if they ended up just only getting engaged or getting married, but I remember I think maybe they were just engaged, and then the father, like, Akiva was in the same room as his father Shulem and the father of this lady, this young lady, and he was just like, yeah, she's like my princess, she gets whatever she wants. And he was saying like, yeah, I really don't want, there's something he really didn't want, but he felt really pressured because she was crying and crying and crying. And then Akiva was on the couch and kind of heard that. It's like, wait, she was crying with you, and he was like, she was crying with me, and that's why I got engaged to her in the first place. So he's like, I'm not gonna marry her. And then the dad, Shulem, gets like really pissed off because it makes him look crappy, and Shulem gets really pissed off, and he's like, dude, like, you gotta marry her, like, and starts like yelling at him and like, you're gonna get married, and like, how dare you do this, and all this kind of stuff, like, you're shame and all this kind of stuff, like, so those first two didn't work out for Akiva. He meets this other lady while he's painting. It's like a neighbor. He gets this studio from one of his art colleagues, and he's provided basically with a studio next to hers. This woman, I don't know if she's religious, not religious, I don't really know exactly about her, but it appears that he kind of likes her, but because he forgets to put on tefillin one day while he was with her, I don't remember if he was like painting or something, and he forgets to put on tefillin, and it's like part of like a prayer ritual, and that's something that Jewish males will do this like every day. I don't know if they don't do it on the Sabbath or if they do, but he's been doing this every day since he was young, and he's like, I've never forgotten this before in my life, and so it kind of freaked him out, and he kind of left, and didn't really talk to her again, even though things were going like okay, and she kind of like apologized, but she was nice. I don't know if she was religious, but he does walk in one day when she's like praying in the morning and stuff, and so I don't really know, but they, oh my gosh, so remember how I said the father Nechum, the one who was like suicidal and depressed over his daughter Libby. So basically Shulem, the main older guy, and Nechum are brothers. But Nechum lives in like Belgium or something. So when the grandmother starts having some little health kind of problems coming up, Nechum comes to town with the daughter Libby. They all live together in that house. So then, Shulem and Akiva start sharing a bedroom. Because there's two beds in the bedrooms, when there's a married couple, because they have two separate like twin beds. They don't sleep in the same exact one bed. There's two separate beds. And so they sleep in their own separate beds. And like I said at the beginning, Shulem is a widower. So his wife had passed away. The show starts with his wife already not living anymore. But he keeps the two beds in that bedroom, and so Shulem and Akiva start sharing a bedroom, and Akiva gives up his bedroom to Libby, his cousin, a female cousin. They're near the same age range, and Nechum, Shulem's older brother from Belgium, sleeps on the couch. Somewhere along the line, I don't really know. I feel like I missed part of the story, or maybe they just started it and you just like have to fill in the blanks. But there's some conflict where it's like Shulem and Nechum have a lot of like tension between the two of them always. Shulem feels like Nechum, because he moved out of the country and never really visited ever, But then came to town being like, I want the apartment. It's rightfully mine because I'm the oldest kind of thing. So when mom dies, I'm going to get the apartment kind of thing. Like, that's kind of how he rolled into town when she first had an accident and they thought that she wasn't going to live. And so, you know, they're all sharing the small house, and, you know, there's a lot of tension because they already don't get along because of all this other family drama going on all the time. And, you know, so, you know, like, before Libby passes away, there's a bunch of tension between Nechum and Shulem. Kind of like the family patriarch brothers. That other brother, Zave, Aryeh, or whatever his name is, he is kind of like in the background a little bit most of the time. He's nice, he's sweet, he's a singer, he's got his own family going on, all that kind of stuff. Like, he doesn't really seem too involved in all the drama. But there are 3 brothers, basically. But I think the 2 of them, Shulem and Nechum, they kind of are at each other's throats a lot. A lot of jealousy, a lot of, like, trying to scheme with money, kind of scandals and all kinds of stuff. Lies and all kinds of stuff. But eventually, I can't remember what order it goes in, because they went back and forth a lot about, like, should Libby and Akiva get married? Some of the time they're like, oh, they're cousins, you know, they shouldn't get married because they're first cousins. And they're like, well, we have other family members who are first cousins. And then they're like, but they're into each other, and, you know, we know each other, and that would be a fine match. And, like, but we aren't, you know, we are not, you know, like. And so along the lines, you know, Libby gets engaged, I think, or supposed to be finding matches, and Akiva is supposed to be getting matched to other women, and none of those tend to really pan out. I don't remember exactly who they were getting matched to, but there was a lot of stuff that was happening in Israel and Belgium, like between the 2 countries and all this kind of stuff. And, you know, they eventually, I guess they eventually get married and have a baby, Devorale, which is Devorale, named after Akiva's belated mother. I don't know, guys. Like, this story's it's so complex, but that's kind of what I remember of it, that, like, all these different things were happening. And, yeah, so Libby eventually passes away, and, you know, that's where I was saying, you know, Nechum comes back to Shulem's house, kind of, like, super depressed. I guess he just shows up one day, no, I don't remember, because they were, like, somebody was like, come get him, because he's non-responsive and not talking, and, like, he's really in a bad space. I don't remember whose house he was staying at, but Shulem was like, no, come back to my house, and he's trying to, like, cheer him up. He's like, I'm gonna make you some juice or some soda, and, like, just chill, you know. And he realizes, you know, Nechum is not in his right mind. Like, he's just sitting there, laying on the couch, isn't talking to anybody. He's really not in his normal, you know, he's usually not a happy, chipper person, but he's usually really talkative. And so to see him like that was like complete opposite of any other way you'd ever seen him in this show. And, you know, Akiva's also grieving, you know, Libby's death, and, you know, trying to take care of their new baby who's still, like, in a stroller, and but goes to, like, a daycare. And so Akiva is one day drinking with his friends at, like, a little restaurant, just having, like, a shot, and, like, in the middle of the day, and he sends one of his friends who had to go do some other errand. He's like, can you go pick up my daughter along your way? And then he got the stroller right, but he got the baby wrong, picked up the wrong kid. And then Akiva comes back, like, from basically drinking, takes the wrong baby back. The mother was pretty upset. The main daycare person was pretty upset, and Akiva was, they smell alcohol on his breath, and I guess, when he takes the baby, I guess, so they go home, him and Devorah, the baby, go home to the apartment that Akiva and Shulem live in, and now the very depressed uncle / brother, Nechum, and a social worker shows up right when Akiva puts Devorah to sleep, and they're like, there was an incident today. We talked to some of the neighbors, and they were concerned, saying that, like, I don't know what the neighbors were saying, but they said that there were some things to look out for. And then they talked to the preschool or the daycare or whatever it was, and they're like, yeah, like, they said that, Akiva had shown up drunk or under the influence of alcohol or something, like, to pick up the kid, and picked up the wrong baby. So he has to explain all this to his father, Shulem, and Shulem's like, oh my God, like, what have you done? But he's like, no, I assure you, the baby's well taken care of. Devorah is really, really good taken care of. And they go to, the social worker looks and sees that she's being taken care of, and is kind of like, okay, like, yeah, you're right. It looks like she's being taken care of. All the time when there's like this little back and forth with them trying to explain to the social worker and just like talk, and like, it's kind of a calm meeting. Like, at first they're kind of like hyped up, and then they kind of like, everybody calms down and they're talking, and they're like, oh, there's really nothing to worry about, kind of thing. And she's kind of a little more at ease at what she sees. She's like, okay, it looks like a nice house and like a nice family. Meanwhile, Brother Nechum gets up on the balcony ledge, and he's like quivering up on there, and then Shulem like kind of like tackles him from the back to get him to like fall onto the balcony and not to jump. Basically, he like saves him from jumping off, and tackles him, and he, there's a couch on their balcony, so he falls on the couch, and I think Shulem just like smacks him in the face and starts like screaming at him, like, you selfish, like, how the hell could you do something like this, and like, you're gonna make other people have to like deal with your problems, and this isn't how we do things, and it's against our culture, it's against the law of God, and all this kind of stuff. Like, he just goes at him. He's just like, yelling and screaming. The social worker's still there, so she like flees, and she's like, oh my God, like, and gets social work involved. And when Akiva goes to pick up Devorah from the daycare the next day after he had dropped her off, like, it turns out that she had been taken by social work into foster care shelter kind of thing, and she was gonna have to go through some process of like proving that she's gonna be in a safe home. So Akiva consults with somebody. He's like, I really need my daughter back, and all this kind of stuff, and like, what can we do? And they're like, well, you can get some recommendation letters that would look really good from your employer, but that's not guaranteed. They're like, something that actually seems to work better, because I guess they had 3 days. They're like, something that seems to work better in the experience of this person they were talking to was, if Akiva were married to a wife that would technically be like considered like a mother, stepmother to Devorah. And so, he had this kind of patron kind of lady that had been purchasing some of the paintings that he had made of his wife Libby before she had passed away. And they had gone back and forth where he was like, I want those paintings back, I'll pay you anything. And she's like, well, she eventually gets to say like, okay, I'll exchange you some equal quality paintings. And I think she had bought 3 of the paintings as like a trust, part of a trust for like her family. Like, they basically invest in paintings or something like that. And she's kind of in charge of that. And so basically she, talks to him. They do that, and she talks to him, and they do that, and it's basically just what they do. They kind of go back and forth, and he really wants the paintings because his wife is no longer living, and I guess maybe they don't have pictures of each other. They don't have like smartphones, selfies, nothing like that. Like, I don't really know if it's culturally that they don't take pictures, or maybe they just didn't have pictures of each other or what. But these paintings of Libby become like something that Akiva starts to obsess over, and he and this lady get kind of involved with one another because of the paintings. And so she had met Devorle, the baby, before, when he had come over to try to get the paintings. And so I don't know where he finds it in himself to just go ask her, like, hey, will you marry me so that we can so I can get my baby back, kind of thing. And she is into it. Like, she's never been married. He'd been married, I don't know how many times by this point, like maybe twice or something. He's a widower, but he's also been divorced, I think, too. And she's never been married. So I don't know. But it turns out that this lady, she agrees to marry him within the 2 or 3 days. And then that ends up helping him get his baby back. And she eventually reveals to him, hey, like, I'm diagnosed with like manic depression. And so the state that he had met her in when she was like trying to book trips and go to like Russia and do all this other stuff with her and him and the baby and all these kind of things, and start a new family and get a new house and all this kind of stuff. And her parents get involved, and they're just like trying to like, pull back the reins on some of the damage she's doing financially, because I guess she was in a manic state, and then now she's falling into a depressive state. And then it so happens that he starts just like ignoring her when she's calling and calling and calling, and then eventually he needs her when the social worker has to come back to do the final review. They're like, it's today, and it's going to be like at this lady's house, because they, I guess, had put this whole story together that they all lived together in that house. So they had to bring over some of the baby stuff, and they're like, well, just for today, we're going to play nice just for today. And so, the father at this point, Shulem, is trying to convince Akiva, like, look, like, you're not going to find anybody better than her. Like, why, she loves the Vorle, she's willing to help you. Like, maybe she's not perfect with her symptoms, but like, other than that, like, you guys were getting along in the first place and all this other kind of stuff. And she kind of has an understanding about the passing of Libby and his love for his wife and all this kind of stuff. So all the stuff they were both saying back and forth to one another during the social worker meeting was very loving, sensitive, caring, kind of compassionate things towards one another as a couple. And both of them were kind of like, you're good at acting, but I got the sense that they weren't acting. I got the sense that in the show, they truthfully actually meant what they were saying in the show. Like, I'm not saying like they really actually love each other like that, but I feel like in the show they weren't actually acting. But so that's about where I am. But relationship wise, you can see how complex it is. It's like, there's all these rules that everybody has to follow. You got to go through this matchmaker, and then the families have to approve. Both sides have to approve, as well as the bride and groom have to approve. But it seems like there's pressure from the parent sides to approve of, especially like a first marriage. you know, if there's not going to be a deceased person or anything like that. I don't know, man. I don't really know what to say. Very interesting show. I'm not done. I'm on episode 8 of season 3, so I'm hoping to finish it out tonight. I don't know if they're going to take it off Netflix at like 2 or 3, at like midnight or 9 p.m. or what, but I don't know how late I'm going to be out tonight, but I'm going out tonight anyways. But it's a really cool story. I like the story, and it got me thinking about, you know, how I've been, you know, talking on this relationship series kind of stuff, and it really got me kind of talking and thinking about it, and I was just like, oh my goodness, like, this story is crazy. Like, you know, I haven't come across an in-depth story like this in a long time, and especially I haven't really had a series that was short enough to kind of binge watch and then have a little bit of pressure to kind of binge watch it fast because they're taking it off the air today. And so I'm just like, man, like, this is a crazy show. But I really like this series. It's really cool relationship wise. I'm curious to know how much of it is accurate to the culture, because I mean, humans are humans. Nobody's perfect. People are gonna lie. But I know that a lot of the stuff, like, isn't, like, appropriate. You know, the lying, the, you know, deceiving and all this kind of stuff. Like, of course, I'm not saying that Jewish people and, you know, religious people are, like, doing that. But, I mean, people do in general. Just humans do that kind of stuff. And so it is kind of interesting to see, you know, to see it. Like, there's a certain point where it's like, wow, they're so... Like, at the beginning, it's like, wow, they're so different from me. They're so culturally different from me. Like, watching this, like, ultra-Orthodox, you know, religious group of people, like, in a... Like, you don't see a lot of movies with them in it. You see, like, documentaries about, like, all the sects and, like, SECTS, like, all the groups that are kind of, like, the little offshoot subcultures that are kind of doing weird stuff out there that people are like, whoa, like, that's really weird. That's not okay, you know, all the kind of weird, like, control freak and abusive kind of stuff. You always see that kind of extremist kind of thing, but you never really see, like, loving family dynamics, and, like, and especially because culturally, a lot of times they're not, like, expected to, like, be in the movies and in the public eye and trying to act and, like, do all these kind of things. Like, they don't usually have, like, a voice of their own, movies made for them by them. So I do wonder how much of this is made by them, written by them, under, you know, I wonder, you know, because I think I got interested in this culture of people way back in, like, high school when I first read that book by Chaim Potok, The Chosen. I remember once in, like, I must have been in, like, 10th grade or 9th grade when one of my teachers read this, like, excerpt from the book, The Chosen, about the part where Danny's father finally starts speaking to him, and then after raising him in silence, basically, and then I was, like, curious about that book. I was like, what is that book? And then I remember when I went to 11th grade at a public school, I was like, you know, I really wanted to read that book. So I remember I got a hold of that book and read it. And then I started reading, I don't know if I read all of Chaim Potok's books, but I read the majority of his books while he was living. And then, you know, like, he did pass away sometime. I was pretty sad about that, but, like, yeah, I really liked his books. And I think in the movie The Chosen, not the one that they have about, like, Jesus' story right now on Netflix, but the one that's from, like, I think it's from, like, the 80s or 90s, and it has, like, that guy who plays the main Cholo guy in, like, Walk the Line and, like, LA City Games. Like, he plays Danny, the ultra-Orthodox Hasidic Jew. Yeah, it's just a very, you know, I got interested in the culture, and it's like, yeah, like, Chaim Potok kind of painted a light of, like, you know, how it was where people just really focused on, you know, study and, you know, different types of traditional things that they're important to them. They're not interested in all the Facebooks and Instagrams and all that kind of stuff. They're interested in, living their religious lifestyle and having their family units and not getting, persuaded by the internet and all mainstream media type of stuff. And I can understand that, I think compared to the average American, I've kind of opted out from a lot of that stuff, but I wouldn't say that I'm like extreme to the end. And I don't think extreme is bad. I mean, if you want to do extreme is good, if it works for you. But, if you want to live without like, that kind of distraction, it makes sense to me. But, yeah, it's not for everybody. Having a lifestyle where you're online a lot isn't for everybody. Having a lifestyle where you're not online a lot isn't for everybody. Like, everyone has their own individual decisions to make about that kind of stuff. But, yeah, I really do gravitate towards stories about these groups of people, especially because there aren't really that many. And when you do see them, it's always this sensationalized, like, oh, there's like these people who don't know anything. Like, the thing that always fascinated me is, like, unlike the Amish tend to be like pretty separated out. Like, they're physically usually not in the cities that much. Like, a little bit, yeah, but not like Jewish people. Like, New York is one of the world's biggest cities and has a huge population of ultra-Orthodox Jews. Like, they have their own style of doing things, which, when I saw people doing tours around the city and stuff and talking to certain people who would speak to them about the culture, it seemed to be people who didn't really live in those communities or weren't totally accepted in those communities that were willing to talk. Because I didn't know that that guy Shlomi that Peter Santinello talks to, I didn't know that he doesn't live in New York. And then there was that other trans lady that he was talking to that I guess is kind of ostracized. I think her father is a rabbi or something, I can't recall, but she was showing him around and showing him the area and everything. And so I've seen it from that perspective, where it's like an insider's viewpoint, but somebody who's maybe not technically living in that area, in that culture at that time when they're like being interviewed. I don't know if I've really seen many people do like live documentary interviews where it's like they're talking about their life and how it's kind of like there's an enjoyable aspect to some of it. And they're, usually they're just they're living their life and doing their life. They're not really there to necessarily be like entertaining people about their lifestyle. But I do get curious about it. Like, I wouldn't want to be nosy or anything, but I'm just curious because it's like, I do think sometimes, a lot of times, even if you're not going to join a religion or join a culture that does all those things, a lot of times I think it's, like, when you see a culture that does something that's kind of like working and healthier than what your own culture does, I think it's something to look into. Like, I got that way with like foods when I was like, oh, like which cultures tend to have like pretty healthy lifestyles, and I started learning about like just different healthy eating just by focusing on like Japanese culture and like different types of cultures that have like foods where they're just like, oh, like these foods, that they eat as part of their culture are way healthier than like what we eat as our culture, and different stuff like that. So I, have definitely gravitated towards that style of just like, oh, like these people have something going for them that seems like it's better than what I was raised like. Like, I'm not saying I'm trying to like switch to a whole different culture or whatever. I love my own cultural backgrounds and everything, but like there are some things that we can all kind of learn from one another. And I think with some of the relationship stuff, it's kind of interesting. Some of the I've heard this from maybe not so much from when I was watching that Indian matchmaker show, but a little bit like this kind of idea of having like a matchmaker, having parents and family members involved, and having a little more of a, I don't want to call it like a hands-off approach, but not so much of a casual, like, you know, in Western American society, you know, we just meet people on our own, and, you know, nobody's really there to say, like, hey, keep an eye out or whatever. Like, you're just like running around doing stuff, and nobody's gonna tell you anything. I mean, I definitely run things by my friends a lot, but it's like, what do they know, you know? And then I don't run things by my family, because I feel like, what do they know, you know? Like, I don't know. Like, sometimes I'm like, I look around and I'm like, none of us really has it figured out too good in our culture, and so I don't really know, you know, I don't really think there's anyone I would really want to turn to their specific advice on relationships with some stuff. But I think it is kind of worth listening to sometimes, though, like, kind of at least hearing people out and like understanding their perspectives on things. But yeah, I think that's real long, but that's about all I had to say for now. I'm still not even where I need to be yet. I've probably got another 15 minutes. I'm in like La Jolla area, I think. Where am I? Miramar Road, La Jolla Village. Yeah, so I'm still a little bit away. But it's gonna be still a little bit of a drive. But hopefully this was interesting. Massive spoiler alert on all the stuff I just talked about. So, yeah, but I did warn in the beginning. So, but yeah, I don't think I spoiled enough. I only kind of really talked mostly about the relationship dynamics. There's still a lot that I left out in the story. So I think if people want to watch it, it's a very interesting series. It's really well written too. Like, dialogue is good. Character development is like really good. One thing that drives me nuts though in shows is like when there's the whole little lack of communication. It's like where people don't just like spit it out. Like, I can't remember what I was watching where it's like people were being like overly polite. It wasn't this show, but there was a show, this is probably the last thing I'm going to say, but there was a show where there were some people where they were being like overly polite, and they were just like, oh, like, I don't remember what they said, but they were just like, oh, like, what did they say? They were kind of like not too forward or too, like, you know, they wouldn't interrupt. Like, sometimes I'm like, dude, just interrupt each other already and just like spit it out. And, you know, it was so much of the show just people being like, oh, I need to tell you something, like, there's this big thing that happened, and they're like, wait, I'm busy. And then they'd be like, okay. And then, like, they would just let it go, and it's like, oh my gosh, just like spit it out and freaking tell them. Like, it was a whole show. I don't know if it was a series or a movie or what, where they were all kind of like that. And I was just like, oh my goodness, you know, like, like, I kind of hated it, like, you know. And so this show, if I had to give it some negative, it would maybe be that, not that there was a lot of that, but I feel like there was maybe just the things I mentioned. Like, culturally, I'm not sure if the whole thing between the parents is really so hands-off. Culturally, that might just be how it is. But I feel like if the parents of the kids who are supposed to be proposing to one another or whatever, or deciding if they're going to get engaged and married, if the parents were talking to each other more, I think they would maybe be at ease more. I don't really know why it is that the parents don't seem to kind of talk to each other much, but that's just maybe how it goes. And also the parents being super forceful, like, especially when it's like someone who's a different culture for some reason or another. Like, even if it's the same religion, but like I was saying, that Algerian lady, it's like they didn't even like try to get to know anything about her or anything. Like, that was the only thing they had to go by that made them say no. And it's like, okay, well, if she comes from a good family and her parents are good and all this kind of stuff, like, why would you say no, you know? Especially if your son's, like, really into her. But that they weren't even willing to, like, explore the idea. Like, just, like, the lack of, like, willingness to explore, to me, is kind of like, okay, how can you really be so headstrong about just this only when you don't really know these people? And even in the show, it's like, well, they're all scheming and lying anyways. And so, like, what makes you trust this person versus the other one? Like, and why are you so invested in one person versus the other person when it's like, you know, all the rest of, you know, the dynamics and things get revealed over time anyways. And so it's like, why are there so many, I don't know, there's just a lot of weirdness to it. But, yeah, I think those were most of the things that I saw that I was just like, oh my gosh, like, it was like a little bit annoying for me, but otherwise, completely great stories. I loved it all. And I'd still recommend watching it, even though I just spoiled the whole thing. Or hopefully for people who want to watch it, maybe they'll watch it first and then listen to this. And see if you get the same take on it that I did. But there's just too much stuff to try to break down individually, like person by person. Like, I might be able to do that, but I feel like I don't want to, like, obsess over this story. But I really haven't been doing that much lately, other than studying and watching this. And so, like, I've been studying for work and watching this stuff, and so this is the more entertaining part of my days. And now that it's a sunny day, finally, I'm hoping to God that there's going to be more sun than we have had in the past few weeks here. That would be great to have more sun, because we have not had a lot of freaking sun, and we all know how I've been feeling about that. So, yeah, that would really help things a lot. But with that, thanks for listening.